Nama Om Vishnupada Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachane Nera Vishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachade Tarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki. All right, devotees, so last night we concluded the third section of Bhagavad Gita. We finished by reading verse 32. So we continue on this evening into the fourth section, which is from verse 33 to 36. The fourth section we call the mind and yoga practice. And it's interesting that here, after Krishna has given all these instructions, particularly on Ashtanga Yoga, of course, as we have noted now so many times, Srila Prabhupada in his purports, he almost always, or at least very regularly, sort of, he brings things to a focus in Krishna consciousness and devotional service. Anyway, you know, if you've been focusing, if you've been reading the verses and hearing the verses themselves, then you'd know that a lot of it on the surface, it's basically about a kind of mechanical yoga process, which Ashtanga Yoga is. It's very demanding. It's not something that just anybody can do. Like chanting Hare Krishna, anyone can do it. A child can do it. It's not something so esoteric and, you know, just otherworldly and strange. Practically anyone can do it. But this system of yoga that's been described, that has not been so simple. Yeah, very demanding. Therefore, when we come to this particular part in the 6th chapter, Arjuna protests that I don't think I can do this. It's too much for me. So then, of course, Krishna, you know, responds and tries and gives positive advice. But it is very interesting to note that Arjuna is really feeling, like this is beyond me, basically. And he was a very qualified person. All right, so this is then from verse 33 to 36, and let us read through the verses themselves, and then we'll go through in some more detail. And you'll notice that the first two verses, 33 and 34, they are Arjuna's strong protests. And then from 35 onwards, Lord Krishna responds. Okay, so verse 33, Arjuna said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. 34, the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna, And to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the mind. Well, some of us may have had experience like that with our own minds. Prabhupada, one devotee once complained to Prabhupada that, my mind gives me so much trouble, and what to do? And Srila Prabhupada answered, yes, I know, I have a mind too. Of course, anyway, we should be careful how we take that, but still, definitely for us, definitely for me, I can tell you, I can inform you, it's not easy. So then, beginning with verse 35, Krishna responds. Lord Sri Krishna said, O mighty-armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. That's interesting, and that's really important for us. Suitable practice, not just any practice, just come what may. And 36, for one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work, but he whose mind is controlled and who strives by appropriate means is assured of success. That is my opinion. Well, that's good news, isn't it? So, okay, let's go through these verses and the purports a bit. 33, Arjuna said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. So basically, at least in simple terms, Arjuna is rejecting the system of yoga which Lord Krishna has been teaching him, basically from verse 11 through to verse 32, just the immediate previous verse. And we can imagine, and Prabhupada mentions in the purport, that for your average person in the street, the average person, Prabhupada says, it's not possible for an ordinary man to leave home and go to a secluded place in the mountains or jungles to practice yoga in this age of Kali. And he basically explains in these sorts of terms through the purport. And you can just imagine yourself. You know, it's one thing to try and do some yoga or something at home, but it's another thing to go to the mountains or the forest on your own, because you're meant to go on your own and try and do these things. And what to speak of in some places, Prabhupada mentioned, we read the other day, a few days ago, that previously the yogis would do this. They'd go off to some isolated place and they'd have to watch out for wild animals because it was like that. You know, and those were like really serious wild animals. Lions, tigers, you know, they're really like big time wild animals. But even now to do this at home, full time, what to speak of going to the jungle. And you know, today, people want something very quick. They want something very quick. They don't want to practice for a few lifetimes, something like this. That's just a bit too much for your average Tom, Dick, or Harry. And, you know, even Arjuna was a very qualified person. He's twice born. He's not a Brahmin, but he's a twice born Kshatriya with a real background in spiritual culture. But despite that, Arjuna was thinking, no, this is just like too much, actually. It's too much. And so Srila Prabhupada says at the end of the purport that those who are imitating this yoga system in different so-called schools and societies, although complacent, are certainly wasting their time. They're completely in ignorance of the desired goal. And on to 34. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the mind. Well, we read, do you remember, I forget exactly, back I think in maybe in chapter 4, anyway, back some days or even week or two, something like that. Lord Krishna explained, and we also discussed it, how there is a hierarchy in our sort of personal system of existence. There's a hierarchy. It begins with the soul. It comes down to the intelligence. It goes down to the mind, from the mind to the senses, and then the senses are working with the sense objects. But in material life, particularly when people are really conditioned in material life, then the sense objects are dictating, and the senses are perceiving them, and the senses feel, oh, really good, we must get this sense object. And so they tell the mind, come on, we got to get this sense object. And the mind tells the intelligence, come on, make a plan, how are we going to get this sense object? And the soul is just lost, just bewildered, more or less just like a spectator. Maybe not exactly just like a spectator, desiring pleasure. So Prabhupada here makes the point that it's the very first sentence of the purport of verse 34. The mind is so strong and obstinate that it sometimes overcomes the intelligence, although the mind is supposed to be subservient to the intelligence. So we have experience. We have experience that sometimes what to speak of your ordinary person, but even sometimes we as devotees, we feel we're attracted to doing something even though we're meant to do something else. And we tell ourselves, no, I should, do what I'm meant to do. But somehow we just get a bit sidetracked. Even for devotees, what to speak of the non-devotees? What to speak of the non-devotees? So controlling the mind is so difficult that Arjuna here compares it to, well, controlling the mind is compared to trying to control the wind. And we can just imagine, I think it's elsewhere Prabhupada makes the point, that we can just imagine someone running around trying to catch the wind and hold the wind and stop the wind. This is ridiculous. It's just not going to happen at all. Not at all. So, therefore, Arjuna is protesting. Arjuna feels it's not possible for him. And then, again, in the purport, Prabhupada makes the point that if it's not possible for Arjuna, who was highly qualified in many ways, then how's it going to be possible for your average person in year 2020 who's just, surrounded by the virus, by anxiety, by financial pressures, etc., etc. So what to do now? Should we just give up and just go to sleep, or I don't know, do something? Prabhupada begins, it's still this 34 and 35, there Arjuna protesting. Srila Prabhupada starts to give the answer at the end of the purport of 34. The easiest way to control the mind, as suggested by Lord Chaitanya, is chanting Hare Krishna, the great mantra for deliverance in all humility. The method prescribed is Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo. One must engage one's mind fully in Krishna. Only then will there remain no other engagements to agitate the mind. Oh, that's really something, isn't it? That is really something. If we get into chanting Hare Krishna, if we really become absorbed, heart and soul, chanting the mantra, not some sort of, abbreviated high-speed version, so we get our rounds chanted as quickly as possible. But if we go deeply into it, and we really chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and hear it very attentively, and give it our best attention. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So this is the thing to do. This is the thing to do, which is going to be what is discussed in the following two verses, 35 and 36. Okay, so let's go on. And Lord Krishna now, 35, he begins answering. Well, he answers. So, O mighty-armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. So, well, it is interesting that Lord Krishna admits it is difficult, because it is difficult. Let anyone get up and say, no, it's no problem, and we'll just flag them away. That's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. So yes, so it is possible by, not just by practice, but by suitable practice and by detachment. Of course, we can note that in regards to karma yoga, buddhi yoga, and these, that discussion, the whole discussion that detachment was emphasized. Detachment was emphasized. But even detachment without suitable practice is not going to help you, really, at least not in the longer term. You've got to have the right practice, not some speculation. So what is that? What is the suitable practice that Lord Krishna is talking about? Well, if we look, let's see, about, 3 or 4 or 5 sentences into the purport. By the practice of Krishna consciousness, however, one engages in 9 types of devotional service to the Lord. The first and foremost of such devotional engagements is hearing about Krishna. This is a very powerful transcendental method for purging the mind of all misgivings. The more one hears about Krishna, the more one becomes enlightened and detached from everything that draws the mind away from Krishna. Yeah. So that's the idea. A Krishna conscious process involving practicing the 9 devotional activities very seriously. Not an impersonal process, Prabhupada says in the purport. And Srila Prabhupada, describing the effectiveness of the suitable practice of the devotional activities, Prabhupada says, it's at the end, I guess, at the end of at the end of the purport, it is something like curing a disease by expert treatment and appropriate diet. Hearing of the transcendental activities of Lord Krishna is therefore expert treatment for the mad mind. The mad mind. And eating the foodstuff offered to Krishna is the appropriate diet for the suffering patient. This treatment is the process of Krishna consciousness. Well, that's really nice. That's really nice. Prabhupada didn't even bother getting into the actual Ashtanga yoga things, which generally he's not bothered with. I mean, occasionally he's got into a bit of Patanjali explaining how things work in Ashtanga yoga. But otherwise, on the whole, it's more, let's focus on our Krishna consciousness, which is, of course, is what we want to hear, what we need to hear. And now verse 36, for one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work. But he whose mind is controlled and who strives by appropriate means is assured of success. That is my opinion. It's more or less the same point. I mean, it is the same point, actually. And it's being repeated, and we can understand that it's being repeated because it's so important. We read in the first chapter, maybe the second chapter, but definitely the first chapter, some things were being repeated, and the point was made. Prabhupada made the point that here some things are being repeated because they're especially important. So anyway, here in the purport of 36, Prabhupada says the Supreme Personality of Godhead declares that one who does not accept the proper treatment to detach the mind from material engagement can hardly achieve success in self-realization. And here's a good one, listen to this. Trying to practice yoga while engaging the mind in material enjoyment is like trying to ignite a fire while pouring water on it. Hare Krishna. Yes, so one has to control the mind by engaging it in devotional service. All right, so now the fifth section, verses 37 to 45. This is also a very interesting and important section because, the thing is that Arjuna, he's presented his doubt. What about the mind? I really don't think I can control it and focus it like you're saying I must do. Krishna has presented his arguments there, proper practice, suitable practice, detachment, and for the devotees they can understand that. But now Arjuna goes on kind of rephrasing his doubt, or just representing his doubt from a different perspective. Yeah. So, therefore, from 37 to 45, we've titled this little section, The Destination of the Unsuccessful Yogi. Arjuna's afraid, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to fall down or just get stuck somewhere along the way and not be able to move further forward. So what's going to happen to me? So let's read the verses. 37, Arjuna said, O Krishna, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes to the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain perfection in mysticism? 38, O mighty armed Krishna, does not such a man who's bewildered from the path of transcendence fall away from both spiritual and material success and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? We'll talk about the riven cloud when we come back in a couple of minutes. 39, this is my doubt, O Krishna, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy this doubt. 40, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Son of Prita, a transcendentalist engaged in auspicious activities does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. Well, that's very encouraging, isn't it? 41. Now Krishna is going to explain what happens to someone who tries to practice yoga, but then either they die before they can complete the process, or maybe they fall down, or just sort of get bogged down somehow or other along the way. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. 42. Or, if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. 43. On taking such a birth, he revives the divine consciousness of his previous life, and he again tries to make further progress in order to achieve complete success, O son of Kuru. 44. By virtue of the divine consciousness of his previous life, he automatically becomes attracted to the yogic principles even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive transcendentalist stands always above the ritualistic principles of the scriptures. And 45, and when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately achieving perfection after many, many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal. Okay, well, there you go. That's nice. That's interesting. Let's just go through it again and have a look at some of the purports. 37, Arjuna said, O Krishna, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes to the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain perfection in mysticism? Yes. So anyway, yeah, this is all important. Very important. That well, we've just read, Krishna's just said, if we follow the process of self-realization properly, we'll realize, we'll be successful. We'll realize our constitutional position, our relationship with Lord Krishna. But, as Arjuna has now said a few times, isn't it? This is now the third verse in which he's just saying, listen, my dear Lord, here it's indirect. He's sort of coming around through the back door. But the point is the same. It can be difficult. Prabhupada would say, Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple and complicated for the complicated. And if you're really complicated, you can make it so complicated it becomes impossible. Yeah. So spiritual life means to declare war on the material energy, and she will fight back. Yeah. So anyway, as Prabhupada says here, Arjuna is inquisitive to know the results of deviation from the path of self-realization. That's the last sentence in the purport. And we have here a comment from Prabhupada in a class, or anyway, it's a comment from Prabhupada. There's a question first from Vishnu Jan, who was a prominent devotee, but unfortunately his mind got the best of him. As far as we know, he died by suicide or something like that. So Vishnu Jan says, how will it be possible, Prabhupada, for a man whose mind is clouded to constantly chant Hare Krishna? A man who's always thinking thoughts about family, friends, country, nation, and, other things too. Prabhupada, yes. How can we think mundane thoughts and at the same time chant? Two things are happening and one will conquer. As Maya is working to drag you from Krishna consciousness, you can challenge Maya by chanting Hare Krishna. There is a constant struggle and Maya is very strong. She will entice you to other paths. But if you persevere, if you chant loudly, you need not fear Maya. Simply improve your chanting and you will be the conqueror. Narayana parasarve na kutaschana bibyati. We are not afraid of Maya because Krishna is there. Krishna says, Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashati. Just declare, my devotee will never be vanquished by Maya. Maya cannot do anything if we become strong. And what is that strength? Chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, loudly, Prabhupada says. 38. Oh, and again it's Arjuna, a couple more verses. O mighty armed Krishna, does not such a man, who's bewildered from the path of transcendence, fall away from both spiritual and material success, and perish like a riven cloud, with no position in any sphere? So the riven cloud, Prabhupada mentions in the purport that you have a cloud, like a substantial cloud, a pretty big cloud. So there's a big cloud in the sky, but some little corner of it, some little piece from the side of it gets blown away by the strong wind. And now that little piece is just on its own there. And because it's so small and kind of delicate, then just gets blown away. And that's it. Yeah. And then just gets blown to pieces and just falls to pieces. And that's the end of the cloud, of that little cloud. And so Arjuna's worried this may happen to me ultimately. Or he's asking in a general sense, just about people who are practicing yoga in general. But of course he's worried about himself. And his worry is that this person who's engaged in spiritual life, but now they're in this position, kind of deteriorated position, and now they're just going to fall down because they're too weak. It means their spiritual life has failed, but their material life has failed also, because they gave up their material life to take to spiritual life. So therefore they're failures spiritually and materially. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that this may happen for those who are trying to realize Brahman and Paramatma, but not really for the devotees. This is not really going to happen for the devotees, because Krishna will look after the devotees. 39. This is my doubt, O Krishna, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy this doubt. So, okay, then Krishna starts to answer. First of all, in 40, he gives very encouraging advice or statement that a sincere person engaged in auspicious activity is not going to fall down and just be destroyed and lost and just hopeless. No. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. Why? Because Krishna is watching. And if it's a devotee is trying to progress, but the devotee is weak. And so the devotee maybe falls down or just doesn't make it by the end of this lifetime. But it's all right, Krishna will help. Krishna will help. So, 41. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. So 2 categories of unsuccessful yogis are mentioned here. 2 categories. Oops, we're in 41. Let me just go forward to 41. Yeah, so 2 categories of unsuccessful yogis. This is from the purport. One is fallen after very little progress, and one is fallen after long progress. So one who's fallen after not so much progress, Prabhupada explains in the purport, goes to higher planets. And after some time enjoying there, comes down to earth and is born in a pious Brahmin family or rich mercantile family. Yeah. Or, now 42 is talking about the second category. One who is the yogi who is unsuccessful after long practice. Or if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. So, of course, we know that Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada mentions, well, he mentions both himself and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as being, at least in the category of someone, whatever the previous life may have been, but they were born into the families of transcendentalists. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was the son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, whose appearance day was a few days ago. Srila Prabhupada's father was a pure devotee, Srila Prabhupada said. So they got great advantage from that. He says, both of us were trained in the devotional service of the Lord from the very beginning of our lives. Later on we met by the order of the transcendental system. So 43, on taking such a birth, he revives the divine consciousness of his previous life, and he again tries to make further progress in order to achieve complete success, O son of Kuru. And of course, in the purport, Prabhupada gives famous example of Bharat Maharaj, who was advanced. He was an advanced devotee, but somehow, by some strange circumstances, he became attached to a deer, and he fell down from his position in pure Krishna consciousness. But then later, he was able to carry on and make progress and be successful. So Prabhupada says, from his life, it is understood, this is the last, right at the end of the paragraph, from his life it's understood that transcendental endeavors or the practice of yoga never go in vain. By the grace of the Lord, the transcendentalist gets repeated opportunities for complete perfection in Krishna consciousness. Even some of us, we're not on the level of Bharat Maharaj. We're not great devotees, we're struggling along. But still, I'm sure many of us can see how our lives were arranged by the grace of the Lord in such ways that eventually, at least I can say from my own case, I more or less had no choice but to take up Krishna consciousness. All the other doors had closed. 44. By virtue of the divine consciousness of his previous life, he automatically becomes attracted to the yogic principles even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive transcendentalist stands always above the ritualistic principles of the scriptures. Yes, so such a person, and even some of ourselves, we just found that even though our friends may not have been attracted, we were attracted and just impelled towards Krishna consciousness. It's all coming from previous lifetimes. Yes, and then 45. And when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately, achieving perfection after many, many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal. So it can be, we've heard of two categories: those who are unsuccessful after not so long practice, and those who are unsuccessful after long practice. Those who are unsuccessful after not so long practice, they were to take birth in the family, like Brahmin families, rich aristocratic families, where they have the opportunity to get back into Krishna consciousness. Whereas those who are unsuccessful after long practice, they take birth in the families of transcendentalists, which is better. But the point is that in both cases, in all those cases, by the mercy of the Lord, they can become perfect. So, yes. So, Srila Prabhupada quotes, what is it? Well, it's a verse. Coming from the next verse, next chapter. After many, many births of executing pious activities, when one is completely freed from all contaminations and from all illusory dualities, one becomes engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Incidentally, we're going to carry on for about another 10 minutes because we got delayed a little badly this evening. I want to read to you now, devotees. It's not so long. It'll take maybe 2 minutes. Srila Prabhupada's letter to his disciple Jayananda, famous devotee Jayananda, great devotee, who left his body just a couple of months or 3 months or something before Srila Prabhupada left this world, same year. And it's interesting what Prabhupada says. This is the whole letter. I'm feeling very intensely your separation. In 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give me some contribution, $5,000, for printing my Bhagavad Gita. After that, you've rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death you were remembering Krishna, and as such you've been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. If not, if you had any tinge of material desire, you've gone to the celestial kingdom to live with the demigods for many thousands of years. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So if you had any tinge of material desire, you've gone to live with the demigods for many thousands of years and enjoy the most opulent life of material existence. From there you can promote yourself to the spiritual world. But even if one fails to promote himself to the spiritual world, at that time he comes down again on the surface of this globe and takes birth in a big family, like a yogi's or a Brahmin's or an aristocratic family, where there's again chance of reviving Krishna consciousness. But as you were hearing Krishna Kirtan, I'm sure that you were directly promoted to Krishna Loka. Janma karma chamedavyam evam yo veti tatvataha chaktvadeham punar janma naiti mam eti shorjana. Krishna has done a great favor to you, not to continue your diseased body, and has given you a suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Okay, so now we go into the last section. It's only the last two verses, 46 and 47. The topmost yogi, who is a devotee. So in 46, Lord Krishna is actually summing up what has been discussed in the previous 6 chapters, more or less. Listen to this. A yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. Practice yoga. So in the purport, Prabhupada mentions there are different types of yogis. When the process is predominantly fruitive, it's karma yoga. When it's predominantly empirical, means using the senses to acquire knowledge, it's called jnana yoga. And when it's predominantly in a devotional relationship with the Lord, it's called bhakti yoga. But there are gradations amongst these. Asceticism without self-knowledge is imperfect, means, austerity. Empiric knowledge without surrender to the Supreme Lord is also imperfect. And fruitive work without Krishna consciousness is a waste of time. And therefore, in the last sentence, Prabhupada says, therefore the most highly praised form of yoga performance mentioned here is bhakti yoga. And this is still more clearly explained in the next verse. So anyway, in the last 6 chapters, different processes have been presented. Some of them overlap with each other, and sometimes it gets a little, not extremely, but a little complicated. But ultimately, out of all those processes, yoga is the best, and out of the different yoga processes, bhakti yoga, as we're going to see right now, is the best. 47. This is such a famous verse and such an important verse. I'm going to read the Sanskrit too. Yoginam api sarvesham madgaten antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam sameyuktatamo mataha. And of all yogis, the one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, he is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. Now, it's a substantial purport, and it's a substantial purport. What is going on here? My computer having a minor revolution. We can't really go through the whole thing, but first of all, Prabhupada notes that in the verse, the word bhajate is used. Bhajate is from the same root as bhajan. We all know what a bhajan is, a devotional song. And so it has its root in the verb bhaj, or the verbal root, bhaj, which is often taken to mean just worship. indicating more or less ritualistic ceremonial worship. But actually bhaj, doesn't just mean worship. It means, Prabhupada says, it cannot be used, worship, in the same sense as bhaj. But bhaj indicates service with love and faith for the Supreme Lord. So that's a very important point about this verse and the whole idea of what is bhakti yoga. It's not just some formal worship. It's a dedication in love and service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, bhaj, service in love and devotion, is for Krishna, whereas worship is for the demigods. Prabhupada, in the third paragraph, let us just briefly have a look at this. In the third paragraph, Prabhupada talks about the yoga ladder. Karma yoga without fruit of results is the beginning of the yoga ladder. When karma yoga increases in knowledge and renunciation, it's called jnana yoga. When jnana yoga increases in meditation on the supersoul by different physical processes and the mind is on him, it is called ashtanga yoga. And when one surpasses the ashtanga yoga and comes to the point of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, it is called bhakti yoga, the culmination, what Krishna is talking about here. Therefore, a progressive yogi doesn't become stuck in one of those other yogas, but he goes through the different levels to come to bhakti. So therefore, Prabhupada says, Krishna consciousness is the highest yoga, like Mount Everest is the highest mountain. And then in paragraph 4, Prabhupada gives beautiful description. The ideal yogi concentrates his attention on Krishna, who's called Shamsundar, who's as beautifully colored as a cloud, whose lotus-like face is as effulgent as the sun, whose dress is brilliant with jewels, and whose body is flower garlanded. Anyway, and he carries on. He is the perfect child, husband, friend, and master. If one remains fully conscious of these features of the Lord, he is called the highest yogi. So there you go, devotees. Just before we finish, we have to tell you a special question for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri. It's from the Journey of Self-Discovery, Chapter 6, Material Problems, Spiritual Solutions. And Prabhupada, you're going to have to find this because it's just somewhere in that chapter. Prabhupada asks, who's the first-class yogi? Krishna answers, he who's always thinking of me. This means the Krishna-conscious person is the best yogi. As already mentioned, there are different kinds of yogis: karma yogi, jnana yogi, dhyana yogi, and bhakti yogi. But the best yogi is he who always thinks of Krishna within himself with faith and love. One who is rendering service to the Lord. He is the first-class yogi. So who is the first-class yogi then? One who is rendering service to the Lord. Try and remember this. So devotees, in this way we've come to the end of the first section of Bhagavad Gita, which has been dealing with different types of yogas, and particularly karma yoga. We see now quite clearly that Lord Krishna is pointing to bhakti yoga as the topmost of all yoga systems. And as we go into chapter 7, we will see It's all about Bhakti Yoga from 7 to 12. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.